Yes, Mama, that's true. The natural way that we communicate with all of you in spirit form of creation energy is what you experience in your mirror when you experience nature, when you're out in nature. That's who we are. And that's natural born, which is natural free. You're born free. That is a free spirit. That is an energy form in all the colors that you see in nature. Because the energy that flows through me is the energy that flows through it. So we know that we're the source of energy that made it all happen. The source from which all creation takes place began with the one. So I catch myself a lot of times, particularly when you're building a tree that you share with others, which is based on a library. So when I was a child, I realized that I had to be willing when I came in here to allow my RAM, read active memory, to be programmed, okay, of what I was going to allow to be put in memory. And I mentioned this before, it just gets burned off. Anything that is less than what eternal unconditional love is, as an experience that is thus manifested in creation, what you thus experience, what we just manifested, means that it's less than what we are, which means it's running at a slower speed, which is the feedback, which is the ISO frame rate speed between time dependent and no time. So when you plug that into 7.2 Schumann resonance, the sine wave of an equator, equate, right? And you can see all the words that they put. See, when you have something that's negative magnetic space, communicating what you see in letters as numbers, which represent energy, with fire codes, fire letters, okay, which is the alphanumerical language. It's formatted. Formatted. Four is a tetrahedron, matter state. The matter state we experience forward in the mirror. That's forward looking. Want to turn to the right, turn to the left. Look up at any angle. Remember what a swivel head is? Remember the movie, what is it, Poltergeist? The head was spinning around. Right? On what? A pole stick. A single pole. Okay. So I mentioned something because I just go off on all these trees, which represent branches of what's held in memory. So when I was a child, it's like delete, uninstall, burn it off. Anything that is less than what the truth is for my energy, my soul's energy, my spirit, the essence of my spirit. And that becomes what we call an operating level, which is the level that you operate at with your software. So now we're into software development engineering. Now we're into tree network engineering. Now we're into building networks that can now communicate through codes, which represents math and physics, as programmable matter, what we thus experience through all of our antennas, communicating with everybody else. So you know what it means to burn a branch directory. You know what a phone directory is. PH1, ONE. That means O, N equals Eve, right? Adam and Eve, right? Electron, proton, neutrons, right? Or A. Then you can go into D, which is a 4, and then an A, which is a 1. And then you get to M, letters or numbers. But the perception, which is the energy which represents the core frequency vibration of what is represented by your living soul with a living spirit, we have the ability to maintain our tune. That, if you will, would be like saying, I'm experiencing code transfer by something that I'm being exposed to, just like the same way that on a shutter lens on an ISO camera that you're taking pictures of, right? So, you know, now you get into the dark field, then you get into the light field, okay? And the speed differential between the two is the ISO frame rate that you're experiencing in a holographic simulator. Between time dependent and something that isn't time dependent. Now, do the math between 7.2 Schumann resonant, right, at the equator, equate, equal states of Librium, okay, lithium batteries, alkaline batteries, right, crystal star batteries, liquid light, pure light consciousness, eternal light consciousness, eternal cosmic level spirit consciousness, one consciousness. Gifting, 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 gifting. Right? And the torque speed differential and learning between 7.2 Schumann, right? Take a look at the oxygen levels on the planet. I don't know what they are right now because I haven't looked, but I also know that they lie about the data because it could be different depending on where you are. So if you're on the real Earth and experiencing 21% oxygen, you know, the rainbow, 7 color rainbows, remember the rainbow bridge, 7 bridge. Okay. And why they enumerate with letters the things that they do at this level, because at 7.2 Schumann resonance, at whatever the oxygen level is now, the last time I looked, I think it was 15.5, somewhere right around there. Might have been a little bit above that. So you can understand that 3 times 7 is 21% oxygen. Plug that into silica-based crystal living light arcing between a father and a mother, running at a Schumann resonance of 14.4 with 21% oxygen. And then use a log scale distribution on that in manifolding space, folding space and time, based on those speed differentials, harmonics, right? Experiencing eternity while you're doing that. I call that La La Land. Home worlds. That's a home world. Because the purity of what you're experiencing in energy, you're not losing any. You don't experience any loss of energy. Are you kidding? So that allows you to be able to be free. There isn't anything holding you captive. And there was a word that I used one time. It's called unnecessary. Really? There's that much energy that's flowing through everywhere? Wow. Man, I don't need any energy from you. Right? So the very idea when it comes to an electrical war or needing energy, okay, becomes another consciousness trap by virtue of those that are inverters or feeding on our stars. Living stars, being a living star. A power generator that goes on forever gifting electrons. So now you get into the learning acceleration and why it becomes tricky territory. And Aaron and I had that short conversation yesterday about, and this really does tie directly into compassion, empathy, right? Living in honor, what it's like to be a mother and a father joined as one, and why I cry every day, particularly for the last several days. It doesn't take much for me to cry. And when I do, I experience that with mama. That certain words are used that trigger lower frequency reaction states between two magnets, if you will, based on what's still being held in memory. It's circulating through everybody's cellular organisms, or all the circulating libraries, all the bioplasma. I call them the arteries and veins of a living planet, a living, breathing, living organism, right? And living spirit. And so I missed the cotton part that was starting out to share, for example, why cotton? Why was I wearing it? And naturally gravitating, like gravitating, magnetically attracted, and knowing where to go and what kind of clothing. Since I'm not going to be 100% naked, right? as is, as built, came out of my mother's womb. And so I grabbed cotton shirts because 100% cotton breathes. Okay. That's why I knew to grab cotton when I was a teenager, a child growing up. And of course, my mother knew these things. So you could see how this gets tied into Madison Avenue. All their magazines, billboards, and all their programming with all their ads. That's sort of how you know. You know, when I was a child, an advertisement, an ad, an AD, right? 1 and 4. Then you can have 4 and 1, 411, right? And how that works between negative complex numbers as fire letters and positive complex numbers as fire letters. But you realize as an eternal creator being, they're imaginary. We just made them up. Hey, we just created these things out of whole cloth. Why? In order to use that, it's like going back in time to reverse engineer what's already been manifested in order to explain it in numbers to others. How the numbers convert into what we see on the visible light spectrum that already goes to work for you naturally to manifest it that way, because the math and the music naturally resonate to generate it automatically because of the nature of who you are in spirit and in oversoul consciousness. That it becomes the automatic license to do that because you're experiencing the one being a one, a single pole. That means the door's been shut. There isn't any question anymore on which side of the equation you operate on, if you wanted to think of it between resistors and capacitors. So when you're zero, okay, so you're the source point. When you're experiencing being source, it's like you're a conductor. It's like a flow pipe, right? In other words, the same eternal energy that comes from the one, which is God consciousness, that is flowing through my heart and soul, is naturally flowing out of me wherever I go. And that means that you've chosen to be a server, a universal hub server, if you will, a galactic server, because you have a source connection. So that means that wherever you are, and there are others that are there, they're experiencing the one source from which it all came, that it began with, a single wave. Sine waves. Now, and then S-I-N-E. Oh, I get it. S, spirit, in N equals 0. Oh, is that what a sine wave is? I could spend forever taking all their letters as numbers and rearranging these letters even to create a whole new language. Did you know that? Did you know you can do that? You know, you realize how much actual power you have when you're exercising your free will that's creative, that's on fire, because you're experiencing so much fire in your own heart and soul, which is living light. Right? Hey, a live one. So what happens, because Aaron and I shared this, and why I've mentioned this many times about duct tape on the lips, bite the silver bullet, the silver cord, right? Silver's X, which is male, and the female side is gold standard. So now you're into monatomic gold, right? And the speed of acceleration, which is how fast are you learning, which means now you have a higher state of awareness from which you learned how to do that. So now you're learning at such a high rate of speed, you become a monopole. Wow. Yeah. So now you begin to realize that having the highest state of awareness, which is God consciousness, you're experiencing being the one, that energy naturally, because you have that higher state of awareness, is wanting to protect that which everything that was born out of an oversoul and living spirit, which means the natural flow rate is going at such a high rate of speed, you're not noticing any difference in speed, okay, other than what is naturally being tuned as a result of it happening for you automatically. And that's like the waves are getting automatically tuned by nature of the codes that you have access to. Okay, they're making all that happen at such a high rate of speed because it is your speed, your core, that allows you to have that access by experiencing the one, being the one. So that's experiencing eternal unconditional love through your own heart. That's just what you are. And when you're with the one, you have access to everything the one has in codes. Now you can begin to sort of see how this works between past, present, future, and why I heard several years ago that, well, the reason they can't be there and they can't experience it when you get into key codes and access codes is when I said it hasn't been invented yet. And now we get into the known unknowns, unknown knowns. When you're in what we would call an AI war game. That's why it doesn't have access to it. Okay? And that's why the security protocols were as tight as they are. Is what we call speed measurements, because you understand, I've known this since I was a child, and very blessed and eternally blessed to even acknowledge and recognize these things, because the information that you become aware of becomes the informer of other knowings. So that's why I mentioned sometimes when I was around 6 years of age, when I'm reading, because I can translate the language, I would not normally allow this software that I'm running to be programmed using the English language. But when you realize that, yeah, but I have to allow that. So I was, of my free will, willing to allow my software to be programmed because I realized it was necessary based on the mission of where I needed to be, when I was going to be there, and be willing to run those magnetic recordings for a whole host of different reasons. But among which is to share what I've learned with others that allows them to learn through others who we are. Okay? Now we get back to my father would say, you haven't even been to school yet. Oh, yes, I have, Pop. That's why we're here. Oh, so now we get into gifted students. But there is a flip side to the gifted students, because then you just might get a knock on the door by somebody that's like Men in Black. You know, somebody's going to unzip a zipper, and there you are. We got you. We found you. Come with us, Neo. Right? The one. Right? Remember what Mr. Smith said to Neo? And here's something else when we talk about Sentinels. Remember who the Sentinels were in the movie The Matrix? Remember the machines? Ever seen a microorganism or a sperm run through the fluid? Right? Sentinels protect. Right? Sentinels. Right? Sensors. I'm sensing. I'm reading the frequencies. I'm reading the consciousness terrain of what's happening. What am I supposed to do? What is my function as a sperm? Okay. And then you got something there that's also highly intelligent and magnetic. Right? Ooh, I want this. Open the door. Now we're in the doors of perception. Flash of light. Conception just took place. A concept. Okay. Of how software development is now made manifest into this realm. Software development, motherboard operators, planetary motherboard operators, and on, right? And so cotton was important because it breathes. And that would be particularly true when I noticed on the fire line, because I worked, for example, on a hotshot crew. And back in the day when we did it, it's not the same as it is now because there weren't as many of those crews. They were considered to be the highest trained firefighters out of the bunch, which were known as Type 1 crews, which means they had Type 1 training, which means these wildland firefighters that are on these crews, which is why they call them hot shots, okay, is because they went into hot zones. So that meant that they would only send a hot shot into a hot zone because of the amount of experience that a superintendent had, which means a hot shot superintendent, he had true experiencing, which is what we learn, how they were going to do what? Fire and water, water and fire, right? And that's known as a black line. To put a black line around what was once burning, that's no longer burning anymore, and that's called a black line. And what's on the inside of that is usually black and gray. The color's black and gray. As a result of what was lost, as a result of the combustion of a gas, burning at a high rate of speed, right? Between the inverter and the torque converter. That's why they were using fire as a weapon. They weaponized spirit, the elements, against the one. That's why it's a war against the one. That's a war against all creation. That's a virus. That's no different than a virus. You know what a Trojan horse is. Remember the story about Trojan? As a matter of fact, so many of their allegories, so many of their stories are actually math and physics lessons. Okay, and particularly when you get into programmable matter and what's held in RAM. The ram's horn. Remember REFAT and what's the guy there at Basis Project? Tachyons. You know what a tach is on a car, right? I grew up with muscle cars in the 1960s, so I can remember all the gadgets, all the idiot lights, and back then, and this is all the programming, right? Remember I mentioned one time about during the 1840s when they had the gold miners, silver miners, 49ers, 4 and 9ers, okay? 4 and 9 is what, 13, right? Westgate, the Golden Gate. No, that's not the gold standard. They reverse everything, and that becomes reversal programming. Okay, between negative and plus and minus to experience the one, which is polarity integration to experience the one. Okay, and so that's why they reverse everything. So it's reverse coded, which is known as reversal currents, and because they're feeders, they're feeding. That's what they do. They want that loosh. They want that energy. Parasites, energetic vampire, same thing. A vamp, like a V amp, amping. Yeah, I'm amping, baby. We want those amps. We want that voltage. So they're after the voltage because they're not gifters. So now we're back to student learning and gifted learners. So gifted learners, man, wow, this student is learning at such a high rate of speed because look at the kickback. Kickback is feedback. Kickback is photons kicking out electrons, right? Wow. This little 7-year-old child is a self-generating power station. You know what? We might have something to learn through these gifted learners. I'm a teacher and a learner. I'm a musician. I'm first law musician, first cosmic level spirit musician. So we teach music classes. Yeah, the math. Math that's in the music, the color codes. What kind of world you want to live in? How big is your imagination? How creative are you, right? So now we're into the resistance game with capacitors. And so if you have any resistance to creatively express yourself out of fear of what somebody else, how they're going to react to that, is resistance. And the reason that it works that way is that's the resistance in the other that you're experiencing by experiencing the other in your own mirror. So in other words, everything that is, you are. Otherwise, you wouldn't experience it in your mirror. You wouldn't have the capacitor to do that. So now you're back. So in other words, the resistance that I was experiencing in the other is the resistance I'm experiencing in myself to do that. Why? Because you already know the resistance in them that's held in memory to do that. Oh, so I'm aware of the resistance that they have in their own Ka record. Yes, because we're all connected to each other. So you want to expose to them their programming? No. Because then they're going to go, whoa, you have access to me. You want 100% full transparency on everything? So you can imagine how this is as a little child and being able to do that. Okay? And so now you're back into accountability. Now you're back into liability. See, they don't want to assume any liability for the crimes they commit. So right out of the box, when you're a child, you realize that these are criminals. Corporations are criminal organizations, and that was brilliantly illustrated just by watching one movie. They have Avatar. Okay? And then you can cross-translate that, cross-index of what's being held in memory. So a lot of those movies, for me, I've always said this since I was a child, they're teachers in their own right. So now you know the difference between, with the way that these, remember, letters are numbers. Okay? It's just like Bill Donahue was talking about. Take the word good, starts with a G, then a zero and a zero, like two eyeballs. Right? Two small circles, a G, two small circles, and then a D. But see, the D that you see is the D where it goes like this to the left rather than one that's going the other way, because you can do both as a creative artist. As a matter of fact, you can turn them all sorts of different sideways when you get into circuits. Right? The energy upon which you now experience that in your mirror by the form and shape that you're thus experiencing it by virtue of the energy that you're using to make it so. Right? So this is why when we think of gifters or gift cards, gifting electrons, photons kicking out electrons. You are the source of light from which you're kicking them all out. So they realize, but they don't know it. They can't project it within their own mind, the capacity, how do I put this, to comprehend. That much information is represented by how that works, by virtue of what's held in their memory that they're running on, versus somebody else who's a 7-year-old child, in which when you think of knowledge transfer, right, which is information transfer, a library building, and then transfer it, delete everything that's in theirs, and then transfer it, but then you don't want to wipe their memory in which to do that, because if you're a natural learner, you're naturally going to learn that anyway by the rate of speed at which you're accelerating what it is that you are learning and getting rid of. It doesn't serve you, and when we talk about serve you, what we're talking about, what doesn't serve us, in which we're losing our shield, crystalline shield. So you want to protect the crystalline shield. So you're acknowledging that you're in what I used to call a shark tank, a feeding frenzy. Okay, which means you're coming into not just a falling round, but you realize it's like jumping into a den of snakes or a den of parasites, just feeding on your energy. I call it the big sucking sound of a vampire. It's just like, whoa. Suck everything right out. And, in other words, suck all the chi, the way chi is described as C, which is tree, H, hydrogen, right? Iodide, I-O-D-I-E, electric. Electric is the circuit. The shape of the E is a circuit, right? One vertical line. Now you've got three bands going horizontal vectors, the way that you build a planetary motherboard, right? Ley lines, connected, arteries and veins. Increase the vibrational speed of the core of the planet, right? But you need to understand here that this is, if you're going to do what we call sorting and collating, all the batteries that are here on the planet, they're experiencing themselves being connected with each other through all of the software systems. Remember I mentioned this before about incremental speeds. It's like running a voltage meter on it. Hey, because of how many batteries are running at whatever the speeds that they are, based on the amount of vibration and frequencies that are represented by their own core, which is represented by the core identity, which means the true identity. Not something that's trying to fake it by being able to phase in and out like a shapeshifter. Right? Remember when I was a child, quit faking it, get real. And so now we're back into learning, gifted learning, pulling the mask off. We're doing what we call a map read, or the operator of the software. So when I was growing up as a child, remember what I used to say? Hey, get real. See, but on the other hand, you don't want to impose your will on nobody, right? But what you realize is that you're experiencing in front of you a liar. Okay? So when somebody's lying to you, you're going to expose it. So now we're into the art of communication, which is the real battle line, the battle line of communications. In the way that battle is defined when you realize you're on a spiritual battlefield, okay, between energy takers and energy givers. So that means there's not harmony. The waves are not tuned in to experiencing peace with Mama Earth, so that our waves are resonating with her waves, her natural waves, okay, where she's given us everything that we need. So when she's doing the math and the physics, the way that she's naturally going to be able to do that, that means when you come in here to be with her, you're going to realize I'm with a mother that loves me. Because you're naturally experiencing and tuned into her core. So in other words, all the lines of communication are experiencing being one with her. On fire. Okay, so now you see how Adam and Eve work with daughter cells, from a monad, a single cell, and a multicellular. Now you get into all the circles. Now you get into all the spheres, right? 12 spheres, right? Inside of a larger circle, right? So you realize you can put everything in a circle, but you can put a circle inside of a box. Now you're into box, geometric shape, geometric sonic tones, the music that we love to play, and what we know how to play, because we have access to all the key codes that allow us to be able to do that, so that we are not held captive, because we're the ones that protect everything. Okay? In order so that everything doesn't collapse on itself. Which now you end up in the DNA debris fields, right? Which means now we have to clear all that, because it's going to cause a distortion in the waves, because people are experiencing the imbalance in those waves between two magnets. Right? Turbulence. That's one of the reasons I love Victor Schauberger. Had a beautiful, deep communication relationship with Mama, and what he was able, he took copious notes and then shared that, right? And why it was that the Nazis incorporated him and basically forced him, unless he wanted to sacrifice his own life, but they were essentially, using blackmail, which is under threat of force, because that's what a Nazi jackboot does, okay, is it wants your knowledge, what you've learned, that they haven't learned. And how come they haven't learned? Okay, through Mama. Because they haven't taken the time to do the inner soul and spiritual work to be with a real goddess and learn through her. Okay, so now we're getting in, and this is what I've shared before, is the acceleration, speed, and the use of technology to shortcut soul spiritual development in a natural living classroom, where the teacher is a spirit with an oversoul. Now when you have a consciousness and consciousness relationship with living consciousness with a soul and a spirit, you're going to learn at a higher rate of speed. That's a given. Because now you're learning through a mother, okay, that is experiencing eternal love. So when you're experiencing eternal love in you to the eternal love in the goddess, then you're going to learn at a higher rate of speed, because now you're with her. And so guess what happens? Now you're running at the same speed she is. Whoa. Yeah. That's called a pathway of learning. And so this is when I realized when I was a child, okay, and you're playing. It's I don't like to use the word both sides of the street because there's only one way. I am one. There's only one way, okay, which means I'm learning through love, because that's what it began with. I am what love is. It goes on forever, gifting electrons. Okay, so when I'm a child, then I realize that is what I am. I can't be fooled. Okay, which means you can't change my identity. So now what you're doing, remember, now you're mapping energy identities, which is the core speed of the operator, right? And so those are gifted. We are gifted. So we share that gift with others because it's an eternal blessing. So we gift the energy that we are. So now you realize, wow, I'm gifting energy away. What a gift. Of course it is. It's an eternal gift. It's an eternal blessing. And so what happens is you're living your life naturally by virtue of not being afraid to express yourself, because the energy that you're using to express yourself is what love is, because love is the absolute absence of fear in which to do it. So anything that I've known since I was a child that I ever was afraid not to express it that way is because of what others are holding in their memory that is holding them captive to experience zero resistance. And that is the torque speed differential between the two. And this is particularly tied to things that we're holding in memories, and even things that are held in other people's memories that wasn't something that we would hold in our memory, but we thus become aware of it in frequency as a result of being in this realm. Okay? Because the libraries are connected. Okay, so this is what we call shoveling, shuffle. You remember shuffleboard? You're shuffling through libraries. No different than when you go into a university library, a public library, a galactic library, and you're wanting to go all through the records, so you can just cut right to the chase. And you begin to realize, whoa, look what they do. They know how to falsify records. I know of folks, just to give you a local area network sort of feel for this, but the criminal justice system in the United States of America. Okay. I could give you a number of I'll give you one story here. I'll share one story with you. Okay. There was a young man that I grew up with. And what the heck was his name? I forget. Doesn't matter. Okay. But he was part of what was known as the gang. Okay. There was a group called the End of the Road Gang, which were dopers. Okay. Taking LSD, peyote, mescaline, LSD, the whole range of stuff in the early, mid-1960s at Foothill High School in Tustin, California. Okay, so we used to go out and hang out together. I used to hang out with a number of them. We're all together now, right? And so I began to realize that the speed, you begin to realize the torque speed differential between who it is that you have relationships with, and realizing sort of how it works between then and now, and why you sort of bite the bullet a little bit and not wanting to communicate everything that you know that you're aware of, which is not held captive by time, about why you're here. And why you know that you're here, and why you're willing to be exposed, which is the same thing as the exposure of the light, which is what we are, to expose the things that represent what's not right. Evil, the way that evil is described, which simply means is harming other people or holding somebody else's energy captive.